There was a caller into David Pakman's show who asked David a question. David answers here. I want to respond to this. So the question is effectively, is America bad? Leftism a problem? Let's see what David has to say, and then we'll respond.
Let's go to Alexander the Texan next. Alexander the Texan, you're on the air.
Hi, David. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Okay. I was just wondering, so there seems to be a subset of leftists in America that I would call America bad leftists.
Okay.
What do you think drives their I would call it propagandistic coverage of like this Russia-Ukraine situation?
I think you'd really have to ask them. I mean, I think if your starting point is the US is uniquely bad, then that's your hammer, right? And so everything will look like a nail. Russia-Ukraine is an opportunity to say the US is bad. Venezuela is an opportunity to say the US is bad. Cuba is an opportunity. You know, if you're committed to the hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I think it's that. For some specific people, we've later found out about financial ties to some authoritarian regimes. And so for some people, there may be a financial aspect to it, but I don't think there's anything particularly hidden, you know? I mean, I think it's just a lot, for a lot of people, it's like, hey, look at this terrible thing China's doing. Yeah, but the US also does bad things. Right. Yeah. And I criticize those, but we're talking about China right now. I think you get the point, right? And so I think it's quite that simple. That's all it is.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's really all that I wanted. I'll let you move on to the next call.
So let's break this down. There is a small percentage, stressing that it's a small percentage of people on the left who really make a point of not only not criticizing the governments that are like official enemy governments, but also doing apologetics for those governments. So, and that's not like, just because some foreign governments, whether Iran or Russia or China, just because they posture as being like against imperialism insofar as they're against American imperialism, that doesn't mean that therefore their hands are clean and they're ethical, moral actors. That's not the case at all. In fact, any government that's large and powerful is to some extent authoritarian and probably has imperialistic ambitions, because I think that it's more about, throughout history, there's been all these different empires. And so it's clearly more of a human nature problem than just a problem that's like unique to Americans, where our government is the current imperial power. So there's a lot of criticism now for our government, but that doesn't mean that if we weren't the world's sole superpower, that somebody else wouldn't fill the vacuum and wouldn't also commit atrocities and be bad. And a lot of those governments, even though they're not the world global superpower, they do commit atrocities. So I think there is a small segment of the left that, as a matter of principle, refuses to criticize official enemy U.S. states, but also maybe goes too far in the sense that they do like apologetics and act like if you criticize them, those governments at all, you are therefore serving U.S. State Department propaganda, and so you're like a willing dupe of the neocons, or worse, nefariously aligned with the neocons. Just if you have any criticism of any of those governments and maybe even their domestic policy. But again, that's a small percentage of the left. It really is a tiny percentage of the left that engages in that, and they're mostly online. So if that's what's meant by like America bad leftism, then it's like, okay, fair enough. It is cringy when people go over the top in defending China and their treatment of ethnic minorities, or Russia and Vladimir Putin's domestic policies, so on and so forth. Okay. But having said that, there's a mirror flip problem, which I think is actually a bigger problem, which is exactly what you just saw in that clip, which is smugly dismissing America bad leftism and also overstating its influence as if it's like a giant portion of the left, because it sounds exactly the same to me as the people who said in the lead up to Iraq, you're either with America or against it. Or, why are you defending Saddam Hussein? Why are you acting like he didn't commit atrocities? When the fact of the matter is, almost everybody on the left would acknowledge, yeah, Saddam is terrible. Yeah, he was committing atrocities against the Kurds. Yeah, he's an authoritarian dictator. But I still don't want to go to war because he doesn't have weapons of mass destruction. He's not a threat to us in any serious way. And when he was at the height of his atrocities against the Kurds, he was doing it with U.S. backing and our weapons and our support. But unfortunately, it was a very common thing to dismiss critics on the left to just say, like, why do you love Saddam? Or why are you against America? You just think America's bad, and that's why you're taking the position you're taking. Like, support the troops. It was that kind of smug, dismissive approach, which was a giant problem that the left ran up against, and it was no fault of the left. It was that people largely bought into the war fervor and the propaganda, and they believed this caricature of the left. And so here's the actual answer. Here's the complex answer. The reality is, right now, America is the world's sole superpower. We are the imperial nation. We support 73% of the world's dictatorships, and we do a tremendous amount of harm. We do illegal wars all the time. The war in Iraq was an illegal war, killed minimum 200,000 innocent civilians, did torture at Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib, violate international law every Tuesday before brunch. I'm just brazen in doing it. The illegal drone war kills 90% innocent civilians. The illegal invasion and occupation of Afghanistan. The shadow war in Africa. The list goes on and on. We actually do, globally speaking, do more harm than anybody else right now because we are the world's sole superpower. So that should merit a lot of criticism. And so I guess my response to this, to some extent, is yes, in many ways, America bad. And that's just intellectual honesty to say that. Now, that doesn't mean that America is never good. Of course we are. The civil rights movement was wonderful. The Marshall Plan was good. The New Deal was fantastic. The list goes on of things that we've done that are good things. Now, intellectual honesty demands that when we do good things, you acknowledge and admit they're good things and you talk about them in detail, but also when we do bad things, you admit that and you talk about that in detail. Nuking Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in retrospect, massacring civilians on purpose, was an act of terrorism, which my understanding is, in modern day, it's known that Japan was already defeated, basically. And so it was just a flex against Russia to let them know, hey, in this upcoming era, we're the boss. And you don't mess with us. So, yeah, when you do something like that, America bad. When you do good things, America good. And so I don't like this. This whole conversation is so stupid because why does everybody go back to, like, you must just be coming from a place of America's evil, which is why you think what you think. And then on the flip side, it's like, well, you must just support neocons and imperialism if you disagree with us. And it's like, no, there's a lot of shades of gray in there, and everybody should try to steelman other people's beliefs. It's like the conversation me and Vosh had. I disagree with a lot of what Vosh said, and he disagreed with a lot of what I said, but you have to engage in good faith and not immediately go to the base level of like, you're just a neocon propagandist State Department asset, and you're just a Kremlin agent. It's like, shut the fuck up. Why is everybody so stupid? Why can we not just have conversations anymore? So, on the Russia-Ukraine front, I don't even know what the argument is as to, oh, you just think America bad. Like, why? Because, for example, I bring up the history of NATO and what Russia's claims are in that conversation, that they say, we think it's an act of aggression for NATO to inch closer and closer to our border. We would feel that same way if Russia or China had a military base in Mexico right on our border, or in Canada. We'd be like, this is an act of aggression. So I'm trying, when you give the Russian perspective on that, you have to do that if you're going to be honest. I'll tell you what the American claims are, so I got to tell you what the Russian claim is. Is it that bringing up NATO at all means you just think America's bad? For the love of God, everybody needs to think about this in a more nuanced way. So, yeah, a position you should take on the left when America does bad things is America bad. And when America does good things, you can say America good. Okay? It just so happens that since we're the world's sole superpower, we do a lot of bad a lot of the time internationally. That's just a fact. And, David brought up Cuba and Venezuela there. The point on that is, we absolutely have done a lot with sanctions and embargoes and undermining and covert missions to try to overthrow the governments. Of course, we are somewhat responsible for the terrible situation those countries are in. But it is also true that there's an authoritarian version of leftism, which is implemented in a lot of these different countries, where, for example, there are controls on the media and there's no freedom of speech. That is also something you should criticize. So those countries have internal problems and domestic problems and economic problems and authoritarian problems on their own, regardless of U.S. interference, but also the U.S. is interfering. Both of those things are true. So America's bad in that we undermine those countries by any means necessary and, skirt international law in the process and do all that. But also, those countries domestically, in many ways, are bad because of the authoritarian politics that are involved and the economic approaches which in some ways, on some topics, have been failures. Both of those things are true. For the love of God, especially when you're dealing with the left, when the left is dealing with the left, hear out your brothers and sisters and try to understand where they're coming from. And if you disagree, that's fine, but be honest in your disagreements. There's no reason to devolve to, you're a neocon imperialist propagandist who's funded by the State Department, or you're a Kremlin asset who's funded by Vladimir Putin, and, therefore all of your opinions just stem from America's bad, full stop. Just stop it. Everybody just stop it. So I want people to act in solidarity more often and to try to understand where people are coming from more often. Everybody's always going to have disagreements on certain things. It's just the nature of politics. There is no one unified response for a lot of issues on the left. In some ways there are. I think the left, very broadly speaking, is pro-union, pro-higher wages, pro-universal health care. Maybe there's slightly different approaches some people take to get there, but those are things that we could all agree on. Generally, anti-war, those are all things we can agree on. But there's always going to be disagreements, and everybody should try their best to understand the other one and react rationally. I guess the reason that question triggered me is because it's just such a smug way to describe people who might disagree with you on some stuff. Oh, America bad leftists. Again, I'll acknowledge that there's a very tiny percentage of leftists who almost make it as a matter of principle. You cannot criticize governments which are nominally opposed to the U.S. I don't agree with that, but I also think it's a tiny percentage, but also the Chomsky rule applies too, which is you, at least on paper, have more control over what your government does. So therefore, since you can actually somewhat have an impact on your government, that is where you should spend the bulk of your time criticizing. And that's Noam Chomsky, one of the most cited intellectuals ever. Certainly the most cited intellectual living. It's like, would this guy describe Chomsky as America bad left? Because that's just not, clearly, that's a childish way to dismiss somebody who's really thought through these issues well. So I think I got my point across here. You guys get it. For the love of God, let's have the left not at each other's throats anymore. We can disagree, and that's fine, but solidarity is so important. And that is something, just keep it real. At least on the online left, there's like zero solidarity anymore. There's zero attempt to understand people on the left who might disagree with you. And I really despise that. I'm trying my best from my perspective. I'm not perfect. I fuck it up too sometimes, but I'm trying my best to embody that in my life, where I just don't want to, I'm done with the civil wars because there's so many more important battles to fight, and we need to get back to that. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.